What if AI didn't replace HR, but finally freed up people leaders to lead? In 2026, the real edge isn't automation, it's knowing exactly where to automate and where humanity must stay front and center. Welcome to the People Strategy Forum, where we explore how leadership evolves when technology moves faster than policy. And I'm Sam Reeve, your host and CEO of CompTeam, where we help organizations design people-centered systems that attract and retain top performers. And today's topic is the AI-enabled people leader, smarter HR without losing the human touch. And we have a very special guest today, Jeannine DeLoche, a seasoned head of people who has reviewed over 100 HR tech platforms, personally demoing dozens of those AI-enabled solutions. And I know if you've done this out there, when we're going through these demos, it just takes a lot of time and focus. So we're glad that Jeannine's actually done this for us. But she's looked at dozens of systems that are, across the entire HR spectrum. And so we're going to learn about that today. She brings a practical operator level insight into what actually works, what's hype, and how leaders can integrate HR into using AI without eroding trust in the organization. So if you're overwhelmed by all those systems and all that AI noise, but want clear, actionable ways to modernize your HR function, this conversation is for you. So let's welcome Jeannine. Hi, Jeannine.
Hey, Sam. Thank you so much for inviting me to be
Yes,
on your
absolutely.
podcast.
So I know that we've been talking, and I'm glad to finally have you on the show today. Like I mentioned, we're going to talk about a variety of different AI-powered tools that span from like onboarding, HR operations, talent management, and coaching. And I want to talk a little bit about compensation myself because I've looked at several compensation tools, and then also in the performance management realm and see where AI should be there. But Jeannine, before we dive into the tools, let's start with you. So what prompted you as a head of people to go deep into AI rather than waiting for vendors to basically bring you the next thing?
Sure. Well, actually, people that know me know that I'm actually transitioning right now between roles. So I have a lot of time. And I thought, what better way to use that time than looking into AI, which is something that I know I'll need to know about in my next role. I also know as a people leader how we feel overwhelmed. It's like this image of a wave, just more and more noise about AI and information about AI, and it's quite overwhelming. So I thought I would try to dive into it and maybe save some
Yeah,
people some
great. And
work.
thank you for that. I mean, that's what we're all about here on this show is trying to really help people leaders and founders of companies out there really get focused and so they can do their best work and we can share ideas so that those that have done all the research can bring up their what they've found. And that kind of brings me to the next question here is like when you reviewed all those platforms and went through those demos, what surprised you most about how AI is actually being used in HR today?
Well, actually, what surprised me is how
Oh
little
yeah.
AI is being used. Before I did the demo, I did some
Mhm.
interviews with people leaders, and everyone is
Yeah.
using ChatGPT, and that's all. And now, hopefully, they're using Claude for reasons we all know who are in the know. But I was really surprised how little it's being used and how much anxiety there was, and sort of FOMO among people leaders. So when I went out there, I mean, I wasn't surprised necessarily, but I was impressed to see just how many solutions are out there. In many cases, there's 5 solutions for the same problem, but it strikes me as, sort of the dot-com era where there's companies just proliferating to solve these challenges, and you kind of have to think about which ones are gonna survive and which ones aren't before placing your bets, because obviously you wanna sign on to a system that then is gonna stop being supported in a
Right,
year or 2.
right. And we've been talking about the general AI platforms, the LLMs for quite some time, such as ChatGPT and the Claude application, and many others. But and of course, people are using those, and I think that there's a great ways to use those tools. And now we're starting to see agents coming out, which are really interesting, but quite dangerous at this stages from all my research. When you start seeing the different platforms, you mentioned that there's some platforms. I mean, are you seeing some platforms really using AI in a strategic way?
Oh, absolutely. Um, I'll talk more specifically about it, but there are a lot that say
Hmm.
they're using AI, but many of the ones that I looked at that I'll talk about today are using AI in a way that is a huge efficiency boost, and in many ways, I think gives better results than humans. Now, I want to be clear, I don't believe that AI is going to replace humans. Rather, what it's going to do is replace
Yeah.
the rote work that we do in HR, of which there's unfortunately too much, and give us more time to do this, which I think is why we all went into this
Yes. Right.
profession.
Well, I think that's yeah, what you said there is really poignant as far as I don't think that it's going to really take the jobs of people that know how to harness and work with AI well, but it'll magnify their work. And it's kind of like I imagine it's a it's just another way of managing. It's like instead of you're managing an employee, you're managing a technology asset, so that can really help your team and help you just to perform better output overall if it's used correctly.
That's such a great point, Sam. But, think of AI not as a transformation, but really as change
Hmm.
management, which is what people leaders do all the time. And that's really at its basis what it is. It's just teaching people to do things differently.
Yes. Now, so let's start jumping into a bit of the tools and some of the research that you've done. And I'm going to kind of cross over on the recruiting one because recruiting tools, that's where the first place that AI was starting to go into those tools a number of years ago. And so I really want to dive in to some of the other tools that you found, starting with like such as those, if you think of that about the entire talent spectrum from when a person starts to onboard and they go through the talent cycle. What tools do you think are the most helpful that you've looked at there?
Well, onboarding is one of the most complicated processes in HR because think of all the people within the organization you need to communicate with. First of all, there's the
Mhm.
candidate who you want to give a great experience, make them excited about the company they're joining. Then there's a hiring manager. And I know as a hiring manager, I would always put in my calendar, XYZ starting on this day. So I wouldn't forget because you have to set up a lunch and a buddy and all sorts of important things. But not only that, when someone starts, there's so many wheels that need to be set in motion, getting them a computer and getting it programmed, getting them an office or a desk. And so the typical HR person sends out like 10 emails to all these people to get all these things done, and then has to keep following up on them and probably putting reminders in their calendar, contact the candidate on this day, 10 days before, 5 days before. So onboarding systems automate that. You put in, and it takes time at first, but you put in, templated emails for all the people that you need to contact, time frames that you want to contact them, and you'll put in the name of your new hire and various other information from the HRIS, and it just goes. And, don't be too worried about, you test it, you pilot it, but you can change the emails if you have a senior hire and you want to say something different. It's not anything that's going to take over your computer. And I think one system I'll mention is
Mm.
Kinfolk, because I think they do a good job of this. And they also have another feature, which I'll talk about later. So you kind of get two for the price of one.
Nice. And so, yeah, I mean, when we're thinking about bringing a new individual into the organization, that's where a lot of this can go wrong, right? As far as retaining a person long term, and I see a lot of organizations kind of trip over themselves and not really provide that good first impression. And so it's important to have a process that can remind and also so script the process, so that there's a good roadmap for a new hire to follow. And so, as you found systems that provide that.
Absolutely. And think of the time saved by not having to send all those emails and the mental load of remembering when. There's also a system called
Mm.
Zapier that is pretty well known. It can automate anything. And there's a free trial and it's $20 a month per user. So if you want to just kind of stick a toe in, I would recommend trying Zapier out and seeing how that works for your organization.
Okay, perfect. All right. So what else have you found? So after onboarding, what is the next best tool that you found in the talent cycle?
Sure. So I'm sure we all know how much time we spend each day answering questions from our employees. And I don't mind, nobody minds, they need to know. But what is kind of crazy making is to answer the question about maternity leave 5 times in
Yeah.
1 week. So, what if you could hire an AI team
Mm,
member? Data has shown that by putting in, one of these programs, and I'll tell you how you can do it yourself, loading up your policy manual, even if it's just for you to search, there's no reason why everybody shouldn't do that. But then your employees, you connect it to your HRIS, working with IT for security and all that. But then somebody can ask, well, how much PTO do I have? And it will give them their PTO or what is my maternity leave? And your system probably won't do it, but these systems that you can purchase will tell you if it's Australia, what the Australia leave is it Mexico, what the Mexico leave is. So it saves up to 80% of time of HR people. It sounds kind of crazy, but you spend a lot of time doing this. I'm sure everyone can relate. So I would recommend this being maybe the first thing that you
mhm.
do, and even just doing it for yourself and testing out how it works. And if it works, you can publish the link to your organization. It's private. The only people that can use it are people that have the link. But of course, if you want to hook it up to your HRIS, there are security concerns. You want to work closely with your IT department and make sure that nothing sensitive is going to get out. And of course, test. We all know how much we have to test and pilot these
Right.
things. One interesting development is you can actually create your own policy question and answer system on ChatGPT and, of course, also on Claude. So, Claude has come out with an HR kit, which allows you to do a couple things. One is program policy questions, another is program 30, 60, 90-day plans for new hires, another is write performance reviews, and then the final is drafting job descriptions and offer letters. So there were all these headlines saying, okay, HR is dead. No, not true. What Claude can do is some pretty basic things that many people are already doing with AI. And if not, they probably should be doing with AI. But I think it shows that systems and the LLM systems are catching on, and rather than you having to create your own lookup for policy questions in Claude, Claude will probably have, before too long, something much more sophisticated than it has today and that can let you really do this on your own. But if you're not going to do it on your own, there are programs that do it for you and have looked into the security and all those concerns. And I'll just mention one of those systems. Now, if you're looking at trying this with a platform and putting that on top of your tech stack, I would recommend you look at one called
Mm.
Whisk. Whisk also gives you more bang for your buck because it includes some online coaching features. And it's an interesting tool to put on. Again, they've worked on the security, everything's compliant. And if you're a little nervous about doing it on your own, I think Whisk is a good one to look into.
Yes, I mean, I know that there's a lot of platforms out there. I mean, the HRS systems they're starting to think about integrating their chatbots or into to have some of that functionality you're talking about. But if a leader out there or an HR professional doesn't have that in their HR system, they can use one of these tools as you mentioned to kind of build a chatbot to help take that first tier of questions, reduce the load and help
Right.
people. What I've found, Gene, is that sometimes there's those questions that employees are just afraid to ask a person. They rather explore with a chatbot to kind of saying, okay, well, what if I did this? What if I did that? I don't want my employer to think that I might be leading my job or exploring that, and so they maybe want to have something that's a little bit more private, in some ways.
That's a great point. And one thing I should also mention is these systems, like a WISC, for example, knows when something should be forwarded to
Hmm.
HR and can sort of intercept it and send it to a human to answer, sensitive questions. But you're right, people can explore on their own. In terms of the HRIS is adding AI, they're all doing it. But I think there's a big difference between layering AI on to a system and having an AI native
Hmm.
system.
Yes.
And so, your Workday, your Lattice, they might be able to do some of these things, but will it be sort of as easy to use as some of these systems that you might add to your tech stack. And, I know expenses are always important for all of us, but I found that they're not really terribly expensive in terms of when you think about system investments. So it's something to look into for sure.
Great. Well, thanks for that advice. And it's very interesting to hear what you said about Claude. I mean, I think that there's one thing with AI that's happening, of course, is there's these skills that are coming up that are little areas where you can use specific expertise on a particular topic. And this HR piece that Claude is doing is a great example of that. So, of course, people can do all those pieces separately on their own LLM, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. But when you have a system that is pointing out maybe like perhaps the best practice and helps guide a person that is not used to using the tool, I think that's a big win.
Absolutely.
Now, and then what after that? I mean, and we're looking at the talent cycle. And what other pieces have you found that are helpful for our leaders to know?
So I think
Mhm.
coaching is a really important one. The data shows that only 44% of managers have had access to coaching. That's really unfortunate. And I think manager training is a big gap for all of us in HR. And I kudos to companies that are doing it and doing it right. But most places I've worked do very little. And, people are individual contributors and they're thrust into a management role and they're not given any
Hmm.
tools. So there's systems that democratize coaching so that everyone in your organization can access it. And these obviously are based on AI. There's research showing that the best coaching is actually a blend of human and AI. But for people who, you won't invest in coaching for the whole like middle, because we usually coach the high performers and the low performers. This is certainly, I guess I'd say it's better than having nothing at all. One thing I wanted to mention, so what the data shows is that AI coaching is best for goal-oriented things. So someone has a question about having a difficult conversation. Someone has a question about, how to praise an employee. Great. But for, questions, leadership development, more psychological issues, very senior people who are going to have quite complex questions. As you can imagine, a human is best. But for everyone else, AI is certainly better than nothing. And there's definitely some really interesting systems out there. There are some that just coach, that's all they do. And they actually typically provide a dashboard for HR on what people are asking about, not who, confidential, but what topics are trending, which can provide really interesting insight. There's a system called Pinnacle, which has an online agent called Pascal.
Hmm.
And what Pascal does is listens to your conversations. Right now it's phone conversations, but they're bringing on live conversations. And you can, of course, turn it off if you don't want it to listen. But it listens to your conversations and then gives you feedback. So you did this really well. You should have done this. And like all systems, agentic AI systems, it builds on itself. So as it gets to know you better and better, it can give you better and better coaching.
Right.
I think that is something that's really interesting to look at. There are many coaching systems that you can check out. Pascal's pretty unique, but worth mentioning because some companies, I think, especially for people in a sales role, something like that could really make the difference.
Yeah. So I've one system that my team uses is the Fathom system for us. So it does, of course, records your meetings and so forth, but it also can give you feedback based on how that meeting went. And it works. I guess they designed a special module uh, for people to analyze their sales calls and so forth to see what they could have done better and so forth like that. But I also know some really cutting edge HR practices that are creating their own platforms. I was just in Spain at an EU pay transparency conference, and I spoke to an HR practitioner. They're called Espirita out of Spain, and they've developed their own AI coach so that can help managers talk to their employees about fair pay, and they can model that ahead of time so they can talk to an avatar on the screen, and it can be a coach that provides feedback, goes through scenarios, and it's really compelling what AI is starting to do here in the future.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the systems are
Yeah.
proliferating. and, they won't all make it. So you want to be really careful about where you decide to
But
invest.
I love what you said as far as this AI is enabling better training and development for our managers than we had before, because it's been a big cost issue for organizations. They're just haven't been able to put the dollars where they need to, and therefore we've had pervasive bad management at a lot of companies across the globe. And so, if we were able to use and harness the power of artificial intelligence to help managers really ramp up and have that better coaching, I mean, that's great, but somebody needs to program the system. And all companies are different, right? So that leaves a lot of space for
Right.
experts out there that are going to be needed to do that configuration.
Well, and in these systems, you can load up your company values, you can load up your company handbook, you can load up your leadership competencies. So, it will coach according to what your company thinks is important. And that's pretty unique.
Yes, and so the next piece I wanted to get to is one of my favorite topics because I'm a compensation practitioner. And so this is some where I see AI coming out in compensation platforms. Really started out a couple of years ago, and as you mentioned, Janine, and as far as the where Anthropic is using this in their AI, their HR platform. Uh, you know, many years ago, companies were using AI to look at their job descriptions, ensure that they're written effectively, ensure that they're written fairly, and to both genders and different population groups. And so I like to see that AI can be used in that force for good to ensure that we're removing bias from our descriptions. You
Absolutely.
have you found other systems that are out there that are focusing on removing bias?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting to look at performance review
Hmm.
systems. I didn't spend a lot of time on this because most companies, I think, have their platforms and probably aren't willing to invest in a new one. But what's interesting is that, and I think we would all agree that performance management shouldn't be 1 or 2 points in time over the year. It should be
Right.
ongoing. And so, what these systems tend to do is have it be like a monthly cadence. Your whole team gets an email saying, "What did Janine do well this week? Where can she improve?" It can also work for team based organizations that you choose this person finished a project with the team. How did they do? And send it to the team on a one time basis. So, it doesn't address your question of bias. And I don't think anyone's doing a great job of that.
Hmm.
Um, but the world isn't doing a great job of that either,
Yeah.
in terms of the different ways men and women are perceived in the workplace. So I think it's a little bit of a gap. I did ask one of the leaders of this systems about it, and he didn't really have an answer for me. So I think that maybe is the next frontier. But, it's sort of garbage in, garbage out, right? To the extent people have bias in their feedback, that bias will show up. And what we need to do as managers is be very alert to it and take it out of performance review.
Hmm.
Make sure that we're being, quite diligent about, really giving real feedback and not feedback that might be colored by someone's judgment or biases.
Right. Well, it is. I think you're right. I mean, as far as the removing bias completely, I mean that there's a lot of work to be done. But I think that we're starting to move in the right direction. For instance, I was talking to a colleague not too long ago about their so they actually use predictive index to evaluate a lot of their people, and they found that they can use, if they do a correlation, it can see that certain profiles and that psychometric tool can lead to maybe under negotiating pay, for instance, or being really good negotiator, and therefore can cause some differences in bias when it comes to pay. And so I think that there's some interesting applications of how personality types can be utilized in the future and help kind of remove bias and help managers identify where they need to enable people a little bit more. So we'll have to see where that goes.
Yeah, and pay bias is
Yeah.
huge. And that kind of leads me to the last area that I looked into, which was people
Hmm.
analytics. I know I have felt the anxiety and sheer terror when a senior leader asked me for some people data. And I know that some of it's in Workday Some of it's in Excel spreadsheets, some of it's in my head,
Yeah.
and it's sort of like, how do I get this report done quickly? So there are several programs that can help you with dashboards. They have pre-programmed questions, which are the sort of questions you would want to ask. They're using predictive analytics to tell you who's going to leave, and they can show you, how your people are being paid by department, by gender, by other factors. And they can also show you who they think might leave based on, not being hasn't been promoted in 3
Right.
years, things like that. So I'm not going to make a recommendation here, but I'll just mention ChartHop, HR Bench, Illuminous, and Visier are 4 different platforms that I think do this well. And I would recommend that you really take a look if you want to raise your analytics game.
Very good. Thank you so much. And then the other thing that I would add to that, I mean, back on the pay conversation side, as I mentioned, I was at a conference, an EU Pay Transparency Directive conference, and of course, the importance of firms like Truzic and removing bias from pay has been super important. Now, but also it's how we classify jobs, because if you don't classify jobs effectively in the beginning of this onset using tools such like Gradar, or it's a data driven method that uses AI in a way to help automate some of those processes and job descriptions and machine learning to ensure that leveling is done fairly and consistently. These are tools that are evolving with the marketplace to ensure that people are paid fairly, and also keeping human in the loop where they need to be. I mean, humans should be making these important decisions around pay and so forth. So as we kind of think about uh, what we want leaders to take away from this conversation, Jeannine, what are the things that what should they be mindful when they're considering an AI tool to implement into their organization?
Sam, so I guess I would mention 3 things to think about. The first would be ease of implementation. Is this going to take you 3 months to get up and running? Most of the systems I mentioned pride themselves on quick implementations, which can be a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
But, you want to kind of look at the implementation, the support that's available, and make sure that that's not going to be onerous for the teams. I think a next thing would be the security of the systems. We didn't talk that much about that because I'm not an expert, but obviously these are taking a lot of confidential data in. I think you have to think about Sarbanes-Oxley, many rules in the EU about it. So that's something that's very important to have a system that has documented how they're dealing with all those challenges. And then the third thing I would say is maturity of the system. And I alluded to this earlier. Is it going to be around in 2 years? Who are their clients now? I would really look closely at that before going with, say, a less expensive system that might not have as much of a built in user base, because you want a system that's going to keep adapting, keep developing, and be around for a long time.
For sure. Thank you so much for that. And I think that when we're thinking about systems overall as well, I mean, the everything is changing so quickly. I mean, there is pace of software development because of AI is faster and faster. And so new features are coming out and they're being created and destroyed all the time. And one thing that's really exciting that I found is the use of AI agents and the ability of working with an agent to be able to develop your own personal software is easier now than ever. And so, of course, they're still working out a lot of the security things or issues around those tools. But I think in the near future, many of us professionals can work with our personal AI agent to help design software that we can use internally to help us perform better, and then also perhaps customize software to work for our organizations. So I think that's something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to,
I'll just say one more
yeah.
thing, Sam. I didn't really get into Claude Code
Mhm.
because I'm not that technically savvy, although I've become a lot more so. But there are many courses out there, different trainings. It's supposedly not that complicated, and I'm planning to dive into it over the next couple days. So I'll let you know how that
Yeah,
goes.
super fun stuff. So I've done a bit of it myself and created a few software platforms and applications for my iPhone that's just easy to use and kind of just helps me realize how fast the technology is moving forward. But I think there's many things that are going to surprise us as time passes here in the next short term as a few months in AI technology.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right, for all our listeners out there, today we've explored kind of like a full talent cycle of and talked about a few of these AI tools that are coming out from recruiting to onboarding, HR operations, coaching, and compensation. And I think the message is pretty clear here. AI doesn't replace people leadership, but it removes the friction so leaders can focus on judgment, trust, and growth. It can really become much more strategic and amplify their abilities. So, Jean, thank you. And for all our listeners out there, if this conversation helped, please make sure that you subscribe, rate, and then share with a colleague of yours that needs to identify at least one HR workflow that they can use AI to simplify this quarter. I think that's the big challenge for all of us as HR practitioners is that we need to think with these new tools that are coming out, we need to consistently look at our workflows and see how we can upgrade or automate some of these things that are dragging us behind and to ensure that we're more competitive and we can bring a higher level of quality of services to our people and our customers. All right. So we'll see you next time on the People Strategy Forum. Thank you, everyone. Take care.